In this video, you'll be setting up an express middleware function you can use to add authentication to any request in your application. We're going to use the same principles we discussed in the last video, although the function in this case will check for an incoming authentication token, it'll verify that it is a valid JSON Web Token, then it will find the associated user. Now, when we first explored Express middleware in the last one, we just defined our middleware functions right in line inside of index.js. This works well for experimentation, but when creating middleware to be used throughout your app, it's best to define it in a separate file so we can keep things nice and organized. Now, inside of the source directory, we have DB, models, and routers. We're going to create a brand new directory in there called middleware. Now, middleware is going to store a new file for each piece of middleware we're trying to define, and in our case, we're going to have a single middleware function for the moment, the one concerned with authentication. Right here, I can call that something like auth.js or authentication.js. In here, we're going to set up and define the authentication middleware, then we'll actually load it into our routers to put some of the routes behind authentication. Let's go ahead and get started though by defining the function we'll be working with. Right here, we can create a new constant called auth, and we are going to set this up as an async function so I can take advantage of async and await. Right here, as we saw in the previous video, request, response, and next, and all we'll do for the moment is just print a little message right here, console.log auth middleware, just to make sure it's running, and then down below, I'll call next to allow the associated route handler to run. Now remember, we're defining the function in this file, but I want to export it so it can be used elsewhere. Right here, we'll do just that by setting module.exports equal to the auth function we just defined. Now we can load this in from other files to use the middleware wherever we need to. Now, in the last video, we registered all of our middleware in index.js. When we do this, it's going to be associated and used for every single route in our application. With the auth middleware, that's not what we want. Certain requests, like signing up and logging in, should not use the auth middleware at all. So let's see how we can get this done. What I'm going to do is comment out the maintenance middleware so our application actually works as expected, and we're going to head over to the user router. We're going to learn how to set up middleware for an individual route. To get started, we are going to need to require the function we created in that separate file. So right here, const auth equals, I'll be using require, starting with ... to get out of the routers directory, then / middleware, / auth, which is the file we defined. Now that we have that in place, we can add the auth middleware to an individual route. Now, the first one is for signing up, and the second is for login, the two routes that we don't want to add authentication to. But let's go ahead and add it for the third one, get / users. To add middleware to an individual route, all we do is pass it in as an argument to the get method before we pass in our route handler. So right here, the route handler is the second argument to get. We're going to go ahead and move it to the third argument position, and the second argument is going to be the middleware function to run, which in our case is auth. So now, when someone makes a get request to / users, it's first going to run our middleware, then it'll go ahead and run the route handler. Now remember, it's only ever going to run the route handler if the middleware calls that next function. So this is how we're going to get access to control how things are working. Let's go ahead and see this in action before expanding on the middleware any further. So right here, I'm going to make a request to get / users from Postman. I'll go ahead and do just that right here. I'll send it off. And what do I get? I get my users back, and over inside of Visual Studio Code, I have the auth middleware message printing. If I was to fire off a different request like login, it would still indeed work, and I wouldn't see that message down below a second time because the login route does not use that middleware. So here, by adding about 6 characters of code, we were able to add the middleware to a given route, and we'll be able to do that for all of the routes that should require authentication. Now let's actually talk about what the auth function is going to do to make sure the given user is authenticated. Now, the whole authentication process starts with the client taking that authentication token that they get from signing up or logging in and providing it with the request they're trying to perform. So in this case, I have logged into the user several times and I have my authentication tokens showing up. Let's go ahead and grab the authentication token that was just created and sent back with the last login request. Right here, I'm going to copy the entire JSON Web Token, everything inside of those quotes, and once we have it in the clipboard, we'll take it over to the request we just added the auth middleware to. That is get/users. Now, to actually provide the authentication token, what we're going to do is set up a request header. So we can go over to the headers tab in Postman, and this is where we'll be able to set up key value pairs, providing additional information to the server. Now, when we work with headers, we can provide them as part of the request, so sending them from the client to the server, and we can also have headers sent back as part of the response, so the server can send back some headers to the original requester. In this case, we want to set up headers that get sent as part of the request. We're providing the authentication token to the server, and to do this, we'll set up the following header. It is authorization. The authorization header is going to have the following value. It's going to start off with bearer, so B-E-A-R-E-R, that is a capital B, followed by a space, followed by the token. So this is known as a bearer token, in which the client provides the token with the request they're trying to perform, and this is all the client is going to need to do to actually provide the information necessary to get authenticated. So now we can go ahead and figure out how to access this information and then validate it from our server. So over here in auth.js, let's go ahead and kick things off by emptying the function we had created, and we're going to load 2 things in. We're going to load in the JSON Web Token library so we can validate the token being provided, and we're also going to load in the user model so we can find them in the database once we've validated the auth token. So right here, a const JWT, and I am going to require the JSON Web Token library. Then down below on the next line, I'll load in the user model. So const user equals require. We're going to use ... to get out of this middleware directory, /models/user. Now that we have both of those in place, we can start to fill out the function itself, and it's all going to start with a try catch block. So we're going to attempt to run some code that validates the user. If the user isn't valid, we will have the catch block down below run. If they're not authenticated, we're not going to call next. We won't let the route handler run. Instead, we'll just send an error back. I'll use response.status to send back a 401 status code, which lets them know they're not authenticated correctly. And I'll also use send to send back some JSON. We'll have an error property with the following message: please authenticate perfect. So this is the error handler. Now, the actual process of validating the token is going to require us to do a bit of work. The first thing we want to do is figure out how to get the value for that header. Request gives us a way to get this done. So right here, const token will store the actual value, and then we use request.header to access incoming headers. We pass to it the name of the header we're trying to get access to. Now, in our case, that's going to be authorization, exactly like we had before. AUTH, perfect authorization. And now we'd be able to do something with it, like validate it. For the moment, let's just go ahead and log it out to make sure we're actually getting the token correctly. Right here, I'm going to save auth.js so the server restarts, and I'll make that get users request an additional time. This is the request where we're passing that token along. Over inside of the server, what do I get in the terminal? Right here, I have the header value. It starts off with bearer, and then down below, we have the actual token showing up. So the next thing we want to do is get the JWT out of that value, and we want to go ahead and verify that it's correct using the same secret we used when we generated it. Now, in order to get the JWT out of the entire header value, all we need to do is remove that bearer portion, which allows us to know it's a bearer token. Right here, we can do that by using the string method replace. So header returns the string token value, and we're going to use replace to remove the beginning portion. We provide two strings, what we want to replace and what we want to replace it with. In this case, I am going to replace bearer space with nothing, essentially removing it. Now, if there is no authorization header, header is going to return undefined, and if we try to access replace of undefined, that's going to throw an error. Now, we could use try catch to catch that, but we already are using try catch, which means that if there is no token provided, the code down below will indeed trigger. Next up, we want to make sure that token is actually valid. So we want to ensure that it was created by our server and that it hasn't expired. So right here, const decoded. This is going to be the decoded payload for the token. And we're going to use jwt.verify like we've done before. We are verifying the token and we're using the exact same secret we used to generate it. Now remember, the code for generating the token was defined in the user model. Right here, I have the string that I used. Make sure to copy the string that you used, as they need to match up exactly. I'm going to take it over to the auth middleware and paste it in. Now we'll know if the given token is indeed valid, and from there, if it is valid, we can focus on finding the user in the database. Now, we embedded the user's ID as part of the token, so that's what we're going to use to actually grab the user from the database. Remember, we have underscore ID as the thing we've added to that payload, so decoded has the underscore ID property. Right here, I'm going to create a new constant user, and I'm going to go ahead and use await with user dot right here find, and we're going to use find one as opposed to find by ID, and we'll talk about why in just a second. Right here, we're going to provide our search criteria, and we're going to start by looking for a user with the following ID. The ID stored on decoded dot underscore ID. Perfect. Now, the other thing we want to check is that this token is still part of that tokens array. When a user logs out, we're going to delete that token, so we want to make sure it actually exists inside of there. To do this, we're going to set up another property on this object, but with a string property name, and we're going to use a string property name because we'll be using a special character inside of there. The value for this property is going to be tokens.token. This is going to look for a user that has a given token value in one of their array items in the tokens array. Now, what value are we looking for? We're looking for the value provided. We have the token variable up above. So all this is going to do is find a user with the correct ID who has that authentication token still stored. If the user logs out, that means this token will be valid. Now we can go ahead and see if we actually found a user. So right here, if there is no user, that is definitely a problem, and we want to go ahead and make sure the code down below runs. So for that, I can just throw a new error to trigger that code, and I don't even need to provide an error message. This alone is enough to trigger catch down below. Now, if this code runs right here, that means things went well, and we're going to do two things. One, we're going to make sure that the route handler runs since the user has proven they're authenticated correctly. So for us, that means calling next. The other thing we're going to do is give that route handler access to the user that we fetched from the database. We already fetched them, and there's no need for the route handlers to have to fetch the user again, as that would just waste resources and time. We can actually add a property onto request to store this, and the route handlers will be able to access it later on. So request Dot, we can pick a name like user for this, and what am I going to store there? I will store the user variable from up above. Now that we have this in place, let's go ahead and test it out, and don't worry, I'll be recapping what we did here in just a few moments. So what are we going to do? We're going to run our request over here from Postman. I'm going to fire that off, and we're going to see what we get back, and what I get back is indeed the user data, which means I must have authenticated correctly. Let's go ahead and mess this token up. What I'm going to do is add an E right up front, manipulating the token string. I'm going to send it off again, and this token should now be invalid. Let's go ahead and see if that's actually what happens. I click send, I send it off, and I get my please authenticate message with my 401 response. So only when we provide a valid token are we going to be able to actually access the given endpoint, and this is going to allow us to lock down our data. Now, we still have plenty of routes that aren't authenticated, but before we go, let's turn our attention back towards the one route that actually has authentication set up. There's a problem with this request, and the problem is that it exposes the data for other users. Now, you do have to be authenticated, but that's still not something we want to do. If a user is logged in, they shouldn't be able to see the email address of every other user who's signed up for the app. Now, we added this route to experiment with the basic structure of the REST API, but when it comes to the user's resource, this is not something we want to support. Now, we'll still support it for tasks. You'll be able to fetch multiple tasks, but once we add authentication, it'll be just tasks that you've created, not every task in the database. With users, there's going to be no way to fetch other users' data, so this route actually doesn't serve any purpose anymore. But we are going to repurpose it for something that will exist in the final version of our app, and that is a way to get your own profile, to get the profile for the currently authenticated user. The route for this will still be get, since we're getting data, and it's going to be /users/me. This is going to allow someone to get their own profile, and there's no need to provide the ID for your own user, as the authentication token has that information embedded. Now we can go ahead and remove everything we have in the function, and all we need to do is send back that user profile. Now, when we created the auth middleware, we assigned that to request.user. And we know that this function is only going to run if the user is actually authenticated, which means that right here, all we need to do is use response.send to send back request.user. And there we go. We now have a route that allows a user to get their profile when they're authenticated. Let's go ahead and save the program and actually test this out. So over in Postman, we have the request that's no longer going to exist, read users, right here in this ... menu. I can rename that. I'll have it say something like read profile. And then up above, we'll just change the URL from /users to /users/me. Now, if I fire this off, instead of getting an array of users back, I should just get back an individual user. And that is exactly what's happening. Down below, I have my user profile, the user who I'm currently logged in as. So now that we've seen how we can set up endpoints that have authentication, we're going to continue on adding authentication throughout the application. Now, in this video, we just got the bare bones set up in place. We're going to talk a lot more about headers, authorization, and bearer a little bit later in the class, but for now, everything is indeed working. Let's take a quick moment to recap. The first thing we did is we set up a middleware function to run for this specific route, the route that we want to lock down with authentication. We passed the middleware function in as the second argument and the route handler in as the third. Now, the middleware function itself starts by looking for the header that the user is supposed to provide. It then validates that header and it finds the associated user. From there, one of two things happen. Either we call next, letting the route handler run, or if they're not authenticated, we go ahead and send back an error letting them know that they're not able to perform the operation that they're trying to perform. I'm very excited to continue on with authentication, so let's jump right in to the next video.